Okay. Okay, welcome everyone. Good evening. We're going to be talking about Amalek this evening. Now, there is a lot to talk about in terms of Amalek. If you take a look at the email I sent you about an hour ago, you'll see attached to that email is the material that we'll be referencing. We're going to do a piece in Yerech L'Mo'adim, which is a written up shiur of Rav Yerucham Olshin from Beis Medrash Gavoa in Lakewood. So we're going to get a little bit of Lakewood Torah tonight, right? How often do we get to do that? And essentially, the question that we are going to be addressing is whether Amalek exists today. So actually, I have the sefer in front of me here, not the handout. So I need to remind myself which page this comes up on.
Why do we have to ask that question? I thought we know that there is an Amalek in every generation.
So Phyllis points out, it says in the verse in the Torah, from every generation, door, every generation there will be an Amalek. Right, but you'll see momentarily why it might not be so clear whether Amalek exists. So everyone just remember to mute themselves if possible. Can someone tell me, just by the way, which page do you have in your sefer? What's the number on the top? You know what? I found it. I think it should be Tzadi Beis. Here we go. So if you look in the first column, there's a contradiction in the Rambam. The Rambam writes, now again, you could reference the material I gave you. It's all in Hebrew. If you don't, you could just listen to me and I'll read for you the highlights and translate. The Rambam writes, mitzvahs aseh lahachrim shiva amamin. There is a mitzvah to annihilate the 7 Canaanite nations. Shenemar hachrein tachrimeim. V'chol shebaliyado echaman v'lo hargu over below sasa. And if one of them if you come by one of these individuals and you do not eliminate them, then you have violated a lo sase in the Torah. Shenemar lo sichya kol neshama. You shall not leave any of them alive. Ukvar avad zichram. But the last 3 words are really important. Why don't you see Jews? There's a Gemara about Rabbi Akiva that at the end of his life, he emotionally said, I was able to fulfill every other mitzvah in the Torah that I possibly could, except v'chol nafshecha, of giving up my soul to God. And he just wanted to fulfill every single mitzvah out there. There are people like that, by the way. There are people during Shemitah right now that they'll purchase rent a small piece of land in Eretz Yisrael in order so that they can fulfill the mitzvah of Shemitah, of refraining from working that land. They have no plans of going to Israel per se, but they want to fulfill the mitzvah of Shemitah. Also, there are people who will hire others. I think there are even maybe organizations that do this. There's a mitzvah shiluach hakein of sending away the mother bird. So there are people who will hunt down bird's nests for you, and they'll find one that has exited. There's a mother bird in it, and that way you can fulfill the mitzvah of sending away the mother bird. So there are people, very scrupulous, pious people who want to try to fulfill every mitzvah in the Torah. That's their bucket list. They're checking off every mitzvah that they could possibly do. So you would think if somebody's really he should want to fulfill the mitzvah of annihilating anyone who is from the 7 Canaanite nations. So why don't you see any of these frum rabbanim running around the Middle East annihilating the 7 Canaanite nations today? The reason is, Rambam writes, Ukvar avad zichram, their memory has already been lost. Now, what does that mean? Their memory has already been lost. So the Radvaz elucidates for us, Lefisha ba Sancheiriv ubilbil es ha'olam, because the Sancheiriv, when he made his conquest of the Middle East, he mixed up all the different nations, and basically nowadays you can't figure out if someone is originally from Canaan or not. You won't know if they're from Canaan or if they're from some other Middle Eastern or Arab nation. So the mitzvah actually would still apply, but it's basically for all practical intents and purposes, is inoperative.
One of them died in Texas
Died early for
yesterday.
many people. What was that, Sadie?
One of them died in Texas yesterday.
Died in Texas. Actually, maybe not from the 7 nations, but let me go to the next halacha, Sadie, and this might be more what you're talking about. However, in the very next halacha, the Rambam seems to almost contradict himself. What does he write? Legabe mitzvahs mechias Amalek. So where did we just hear about Amalek recently? Come on, guys. Who was in shul this past week? Who read the parsha this past week? Oh, yeah, at the end of Audrey, I saw you raise your hand over there. You read it.
Yeah, it's in the parsha this past week, isn't it?
Very good. All the way at the end. Amalek attacks us on our way out of Egypt. And so this is very timely, not just because Purim's coming up, but our initial introduction to Amalek is in this week's parsha. So regarding the mitzvah of annihilating the nation of Amalek, Rambam writes, V'chein mitzvah say, la'abed zera Amalek, there's a mitzvah to say, a positive mitzvah, to destroy any of the offsprings of the nation of Amalek. Shenemar timcha es zecher Amalek, it says you shall utterly erase any memory of the Amalek nation. However, what's missing from this halacha in the Rambam that he could have written here, but he did not? He could have ended off also by saying, Ukvar avad zichram. But their memory is already gone. We don't know how to identify Amalekim anymore. It's the same way the mitzvah of annihilating the 7 Canaanite nations. It was only when the Shusamim were around and we knew who they were. Amalek also, right? Can anyone here identify? Do you know who's from the Amalek nation, from the Amalek line? No. So why is let me just mute where all the noise is coming from. There we go. So the question is, why didn't Rambam write Ukvar avad zichram for Amalek as well? It would seem to almost indicate that there's still a mitzvah to eliminate Amalek today. However, before we go down that route, it's worth noting, you look on the bottom of the first column, the Minchas Chinuch writes, V'hai dina einon mitzuvim bezeh, ki chvar ola sancheir ubilbul es ha'olam. He says the same thing. When Rambam wrote in the previous halacha, Ukvar avad zichram, that we no longer can identify Canaanites, he also meant, and also for Amalekim in the next halacha as well, we don't know how to identify them either. So for all practical intents and purposes, these mitzvos are no longer applicable. Now, I know that's probably a huge relief for some of us, because a lot of us reasonably probably are uncomfortable with the notion of destroying an entire nation. After all, living in a post-Holocaust era, it was not so long ago that we ourselves were on the receiving end of a nation attempting to commit genocide against another. So there are many who grapple with this from a theological standpoint, philosophical standpoint, and Rabbi Norman Lamb actually has an entire essay, it's like 30, 40 pages, where he addresses this from a theological standpoint. I skimmed it. It's possible I missed it, but I'm not sure if we wind up with any answers in the end that really get to the heart of the issue. My goal is not really to address that question tonight, but I figure it's worth stating that because that's the elephant in the room anytime you bring up Amalek. Okay. Now, who's going to tell me, what's the famous Soloveitchik piece on this? Anyone know the famous Soloveitchik on this, on Amalek? Well, apparently it's not famous enough. I mean, look, at least I have what to share. You know, you have something you don't know yet. I have something to share that's new. That's good to hear. So the Soloveitchik, first of all, those who are following along inside, it's noteworthy that Soloveitchik gets quoted in this book, especially as Hagon Rav Yosef Dov Halevi, because in the yeshiva world, they don't really acknowledge Reb Yosef Soloveitchik from YU. They don't really acknowledge his existence. And if they do, well, generally what they'll do is, like in Hare Kedem, another book, they refer to him as the Av Bastin de Boston. They refer to him as the head of the Boston Rabbinical Court. But no mention of YU, no mention of Yeshivas Rabbein Chanan. So that's what they have to do in order to put him in a book. But I was still pretty impressed that he made it into a Lakewood book here. How many Lakewood books do you know that quote the Rav from YU? So I thought that was interesting. Of course, he has to quote it from this journal called the Yeshurim Journal. So that way it's more of a kosher Torah source, but nonetheless, still very impressive. What does Reb Soloveitchik say? So Reb Soloveitchik quotes his grandfather, the great Reb Chaim Brisker, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik. Reb Chaim says, and now we're in the second column where I underlined in the second paragraph, second column on the first page. Da mitzvah say shel mechias Amalek eino rak al zer Amalek bilvad. Reb Chaim says the mitzvah of annihilating Amalek does not only pertain literally to the genealogical heirs of Amalek, elagam al kol oson arishayim shebechol hadoros hanelchamim keneged Hashem va'amo v'holchim midarcho shel Amalek shegam heim bichlal mitzvah la'aved zecher Amalek. But rather, any wicked nation that follows in the ways of Amalek and commits war against God and his nation, they are walking in the ways of Amalek, and therefore the same mitzvah say, the same way we're commanded to destroy any genealogical heirs of Amalek, anyone who adopts the ideology of Amalek gets the status of Amalek to the extent that we have a mitzvah to eliminate them as well, which comes to the point I think that my grandfather was referencing, that somebody who is a terrorist, who is hell-bent on destroying the Jewish people, I'm still not clear what the Texas case was, but maybe that was it. But anyone who's like a terrorist who wants to...
They found there was a conspiracy. Two teenagers that were arrested in England in connection with this.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize it went... Wow. It goes deeper. I guess I'll have to read the journal.
Came across the southern border.
Oh, okay. I'll have to read the journal tomorrow and get more coverage. But the point being, the principle of your observation, I think, is very important for us, which is if there are people who are ideologically motivated to kill Jews, they have a status of Amalek, and is a mitzvah to eliminate them as well. Now, this is a really nice idea, but let me ask you guys, is this a Monday night topic idea, or is this a Saturday morning sermon idea? And Rabbi Lamb talks about this in his essay, where, there's certain ideas that are nice ideas. It's what we call drush. It's what we call homiletics. Those are things that I could get up on a Saturday morning at the pulpit in the sanctuary and share a nice idea to motivate everyone to do good stuff. But right now, we're in our Monday night mode over here. We're asking a halachic, legalistic question. Is that really true that anyone who's ideologically hell-bent on destroying Jewish people gets the status of Amalek? I'm fine with that, but it seems like a bit of a jump to say with no basis. In fact, Reb Soloveitchik takes issue with what Reb Chaim says. I actually was not aware of this. Usually when I see it quoted, it seems like Reb Soloveitchik adopts his grandfather's position on the issue. But supposedly, according to this entry in the journal, I have to check the primary source myself. Reb Soloveitchik said, no. How can you say? Amalek is genealogical. The pshita, the mitzvah mechias Amalek shayechet rak l'zar shamalek, v'lo l'chol misha mas b'shitaso arab. It's a specific nation. It's a specific genealogical line. What gives her, Reb Chaim's amazing, but what gave him the right to expand this? What Gemara is he citing? What precedent did he find to make, and this is not just like any assertion in halakha. I mean, think about it. the ramifications, the consequences of being able to extend the category of Amalek to other people nowadays, it could cause all sorts of damage, because you're going to ask, like, first of all, who gets to make the determination who's Amalek and who's not Amalek? And then after that, let's say, according to some people, we paskin that nation's Amalek. According to some rabbis, we don't paskin nation's Amalek. So you're going to find some Jews are going to be committing acts of murder according to others, and according to others is acts of heroism. Imagine, like, this get really messy. So, but aside for that,
Rabbi,
sorry,
Rabbi.
if I may just finish formulating this point. So therefore, I'm going to give you Rav Soloveitchik's rebuttal, and then I'll take Dina and then my grandfather's point on this issue. So what's Rav Soloveitchik's rebuttal to his grandfather? He quotes a Rambam in the Mor Nevuchim. We're on page Tzadi Gimel right now, in the bottom of the first column, in the underline. Rambam in the Mor Nevuchim asks a very important question that any of us who follows the Parshios have asked ourselves at some point. I guarantee you've wondered this at some point if you pay attention to the laning, which is, what is, especially in Bereshit, what is with all the genealogy? Why do I need to know about this person's grandmother's dog's sister's husband's divorce? Like, why do I need to know all this? Why is this in the Torah? Is not a history book, right? We get told that all the time. When I was a kid in elementary school, they drilled that in their head. They said, Kindlech, it's not a history book. The Torah is divine from God. So then why is Hashem dedicating space in his Sefer Torah for genealogy? One reason, it's not going to explain everything, but one important reason Rambam says is Hashem Yisbarach Tziva Limcho Zecher Amalek Levan, because Hashem only wants us to destroy Amalek. But Amalek Amnam Haya ben Alifas ben Tinachos Lotam. And Amalek is a specific subset of the nation that comes from Esav, from Eliphaz. Achshar b'nei Esav l'tziv l'hargam. But any other descendants of Esav that are not from Eliphaz's line, we don't have a mitzvah to kill them, and to kill them would probably be murder, actually. Therefore, per force, the Torah had to outline the genealogy of Esav, because we think about, not only are we getting the genealogy, we're getting the genealogy of the bad guys. Why do we need the genealogy of the bad guys? Why do they get mentioned in the Torah? So we'd wind up accidentally killing people that are not really part of Amalek. Therefore, the Torah had to outline their family lines. Just because someone resides in Seir, or just because someone is found among the tribe of Amalek, doesn't necessarily mean they're an Amalek. They're on a business trip and they flew to Hong Kong or something. People go on business trips. Someone flew to wherever the Amalek people are hanging out to do business. Doesn't make him Amalek. That's why the Torah had to emphasize this, to teach us, lest you start applying Amalek to anybody. So who is Reb Chaim? I mean, Reb Chaim's amazing. Reb Chaim's remarkable. I'm offer tachas raglav, on the dust under his feet. But Rav Soloveitchik says, I don't understand where he came up with this. If anything, the Torah, by specifying the genealogy, tells us otherwise. That's only the genealogical heirs of Amalek. Nonetheless, and I'll conclude with this and take a few questions. Nonetheless, if one does accept Reb Chaim's assertion, then it answers the question of the contradiction in the Rambam. Why did Rambam say that eliminating the 7 Canaanite nations no longer applies today, but eliminating Amalek seemingly does apply nowadays? Well, if we accept Reb Chaim says, yeah, we don't, true. Similar to the 7 Canaanite nations, I can't identify a genealogical heir to Amalek, but I can identify an ideological heir to Amalek. And if I'm able to identify an ideological heir to Amalek, which unfortunately we know no shortage of those who would like to do war and destroy the Jewish people, then guess what? The mitzvah of Amalek still is operative today, still applies, and that's why Rambam did not write Ukvar Avad Zichra. Let me pause. Let me take questions. Dina, my grandfather, and then anyone else want to get in the queue? Okay, Dina, you're up.
Okay. Yes, I don't have the text in front of me, but when it says Zachor, doesn't it reference what B'tzeitchem and Mitzrayim, specifically what they did to you when you left Egypt? So that's really pointing to a very particular people.
Mhm.
Am I
Yeah,
wrong in
exactly.
remembering it? Okay.
Yes, I would agree.
And
So it
so
sounds like
I
you're
went-
agreeing with Rasalovich's contention with his grandfather.
Yeah, but I think it's also the pshat is very specific. You're talking about the particular nation that did something to you when you left Egypt. Not, it's not a metaphor for evil.
So to be fair, I agree with your point. Reb Chaim is not saying that he's not relegating Amalek to a complete metaphor or to ideology alone. It's a yes and. He's saying, yes, Amalek is a specific genealogy. It's a specific nation, a specific family, and all of their descendants. But on top of that, it's Svei Dina, it's classic Brisker. There's two categories here. The second category are those who inherit the ideology of Amalek. And that you could find, unfortunately, anywhere in the world, potentially. Does that make sense?
Sure. Okay.
It must be more than just Amalek, the Amalek of the Torah, because why would we need to remember it if they're not around anymore? Those that committed the sin, the crime. They're not here anymore.
Right. No, you're absolutely correct, Phyllis. And that's really the challenge. The challenge is that we're told it's midor dor. We just read in last week's parsha. It's from generation to generation. So it's got to be applicable in some way, presumably. I mean, every mitzvah in the Torah is applicable in general. Any mitzvah is applicable unless we have reason to believe it's no longer applicable, unless there's a halakhic reason why we should no longer be keeping that mitzvah. Again, just decide to stop doing mitzvahs. But aside for that, here, literally the Torah says itself, black on white, midor dor, from generation to generation, seemingly, ad biaskol tzedek, until Mashiach comes. So this really sounds like something that the Torah wants to emphasize is not just going to disappear after the Jews are sent into exile. Zadie, then Toby.
Yeah. The halacha is that when your enemy comes to kill you, you rise up and kill him first. We're talking about the right of self-defense, which I think is almost universally recognized, and it certainly is in New York State as established in the trial of he was 17 when he killed two white people who were trying to kill him, although some propagandists claim that still claiming that he killed two black men.
Okay, so what's the point you're making?
The point is you have a right to kill somebody who wants to.
Right. Oh, okay, good. So I think, a question that might come from what you're saying, Zadie, is why do I need this new classification of Amalek? Anyone who wants to kill me, I have a right to kill them in self-defense, even if they're not Amalek, right? So what's the novelty of this idea of Amalek? So I'll give you two reasons off the top of my head why Amalek would be even worse than what you could do in self-defense. In self-defense, the Gemara Sanhedrin says that if you can incapacitate the assailant rather than kill them, then you should incapacitate them, like cut off their leg, whatever it is, instead. Amalek, you wouldn't stop at incapacitating them. You would actually have a mandate to kill them. That's number one. Number two, it didn't occur to me at first, but someone had brought this up during my shir between Mincha and Mariv last night. Yeah, it's Monday now. 2 nights ago when I gave the shir at Shul. And they said, well, once you define a nation as Amalek, even in theory, the non-combatants would be included in there. Even those who are considered standard civilians would be included in that din as well. So, and that's really the danger of not just saying pikuach nefesh, we have to defend ourselves, you should rise up, but calling a nation Amalek gives one license to go far beyond self-defense. And that's really the potentially troubling nature of being able to apply that seemingly without any limitations.
Just to cite a relatively recent occurrence or a series of occurrences that happened in my lifetime, not yours. We firebombed and carpet bombed Germany. We firebombed Japan. We dropped 2 nukes on Japan. We killed an awful lot of civilians deliberately so. Of course, they had done the same thing in Britain and other countries. And on both sides of it, the idea was to beat the other country into submission by killing the civilians, destroying their morale. It's done.
Yeah. Right.
And Riley is still doing it as amongst others.
Right. Well, it would seem that rationale might be involved here with Amalek possibly. So that's a good observation. Toby, you're waiting there, right? You still have a question?
Yeah, no, I mean, I didn't have anything profound. I was really just going to address when I first got on, somebody was asking, I think maybe it was Dina, about, why do we have to, they're gone. Why do we have to remember Amalek? And to me, that just seems it's to remind us of what did happen with Amalek so that we're continually on the lookout for the next Amalek. Because if we don't actively remember, the way we do with, so many other things in our observance where we perform acts of active remembrance, then we're going to forget and our guard will be down and we won't realize when now there's another Amalek. And maybe it's not going to be quite as bad as Amalek, but still, if we remember Amalek, then we're on the lookout. So
okay, good. So that makes sense. I think from a pragmatic standpoint, what you're saying, Toby, makes sense that it's like the never again idea. Well, different people have different ideas of what never again means, of course. But from a most pragmatic standpoint, it just means let's be on the lookout and make sure we don't get attacked by Amalek a second time, which I think fits very well with this understanding of Reb Chaim. But I want to point you to the next paragraph here. You'll see a circle, base point base, which our good friend, Rabbi Moshe Sternbach. I know Zadie, you get to hear a lot from Moshe Sternbach also from Rabbi Bronstein. Our good friend, Rabbi Moshe Sternbach, he actually has a little bit of a different presentation of how he understood what Reb Chaim said. So take a look on page Sadi Gimel, the second column, if you're following inside. So Rav Moshe Sternbach writes in Tshuvos V'Anhagos, he asked the question that's bothering, one of the many questions that's bothering us. Divrei hagrach zatzal, but nusach shona ksas is elishon. Okay, so here we go. Amalek came uma misuyemes, b'nei achshav shenisbalo bein umos lechor mitzvah smichias Amalek betela batla. It would seem that since Amalek got mixed up with other nations, we cannot identify them today. Therefore, we don't have a mitzvah to eliminate them anymore. Alva b'Torah harei nemar midor dor. But as we mentioned previously, and Phyllis, you brought up this point, it says in the Torah from generation to generation we have this mandate. So how can it just be, I guess we can't identify them anymore? Too bad we can't do the mitzvah. That's a little bit of a cop-out. That's not kol midor dor. So you look in the underline, he quotes Reb Chaim Brisker, who says, Sheba Amalek ha-mitzvah hi la'abed zecher Amalek. Look at this diak over here. What's the mitzvah? Not just to eliminate Amalek, but the memory of Amalek, the zecher or zecher, depending how you pronounce it, zecher Amalek. What's that mean? V'hainu le'abed shitosam usinasam la'akadosh baruch hu. That's to destroy their ideology and their hatred for God. Shatalu kol anhagos ha'olam b'mikra v'hainu keri. That they say all occurrences in this world are by happenstance and there is no divine providence. And that's what it means. Shakarcha b'derech, Amalek just happened upon us. Ushita zos hi kfira mamish. And this is the consummate form of heresy. Lo dami l'shita shar avodah zar shetosha kadosh baruch hu masa l'hanhaga. And this is actually Gerua Yoser. This is even worse than idolatry. Because in idolatry, there's a mistaken assumption that many have that there was God, but God gave power to these sub-deities. But here, for Amalek, Elohim kofrim v'lochlim bedas. They fundamentally oppose religion. They fundamentally oppose God altogether. Mitzvah zo nishar lanu ad hayom. And this mitzvah certainly is applicable today, perhaps even more applicable than ever. And that's why the Rambam doesn't say we can no longer identify Amalek today. There's no longer a mitzvah of a killing Amalek today. Because they might be gone. We might not be able to identify them. For all we know, there's no longer any descendants of Amalek on this earth, for all we know. But their ideology, whether someone got it directly from Amalek or whether someone came to the same conclusions independently, their ideology is more alive than ever. And so you turn the page to page Tzadi Daled, and you look in the paragraph I bracketed off. He writes, "Lefizeh nimtza debe'emes leika mitzvah laharag anshi u'ma'acheret zohov medan Hashem Amalek." So this is where it differs from Rav Soloveitchik's understanding of his grandfather. Rav Soloveitchik's understanding of his grandfather, of Reb Chaim, is that any modern day incarnation of Amalek, we have a mandate to kill him as well. Whereas Rav Shermach says there's no mitzvah to literally kill the people of the modern day manifestation of Amalek, but rather, what is our goal? Our goal, what's the issue? The issue is their ideology. So our goal shouldn't necessarily be to eliminate the people, but to eliminate the ideology that they espouse. The mitzvah to literally kill only applies to the original nation of Amalek. But not to kill any other nation. And that's what it means nowadays. What's it mean? Door, every generation, we have a mandate to destroy the Zecher of Amalek, the memory of Amalek, specifically not Amalek, but the Zecher of Amalek, the ideology of Amalek. And notice the ideology here is not the ideology to kill Jews. This addresses your question, Zadie. Because of course we have to defend ourselves against anyone who wants to kill us. What's the chiddush there? I don't need to be told to defend myself. But what it means is to destroy the ideology of Amalek, which removes God's providence from the equation of this world, and they fight against faith itself. And so that's the fundamental difference between how Rav Moshe Sternbach understood Reb Chaim versus the grandson of Reb Chaim, Rav Yosef Ber, Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik, and it leads to two very radical, different conclusions. One saying mamash to murder people today, one saying let's just destroy their ideology. Now, before I take your question, Phyllis, I just want to point out one thing that we'll do next time. This will take two or three times. And by the way, you might be wondering what happened to the Lo Yilvash topic, the cross-dressing. So I'll let you guys know what the plan is. The plan is me, along with three of my esteemed younger rabbinic colleagues, not the ones that you usually see, three new ones, one who's a rabbi in Merrick, one who's a rabbi in Texas, and one who's a JLIC rabbi. Similar to what we did before Rosh Hashanah during Elul, we had a pre-Rosh Hashanah series. Remember that one? Each week, one of us taught. So we're going to do that again leading up to Purim. I just got their commitments, and I'll teach my Lo Yilvash as a one class. I'll squeeze it all into 45 minutes leading up to Purim. It'll take place during this time slot. So that's why I want to get in my other Purim topics before we get to that. So next time, we're going to do a really fast thing. You look at footnote 45, footnote Mem Hey over here. He quotes from Rav Elchanan Wasserman. Rav Elchanan Wasserman, Hashem Yikon Damo, he was martyred in the Holocaust. He perished in the Holocaust because I'll tell you a little bit more about it next time. But what's going to be really fascinating about Rav Elchanan Wasserman is that until now, whether we accept Rav Soloveitchik or Rav Moshe Sternbach's interpretation of Reb Chaim, they both are speaking vis-a-vis other nations, people who are not Jewish. Rav Elchanan Wasserman takes this idea one step further, and he says the modern day status of Amalek need not be limited only to non-Jews, but we're here for equal opportunity, right? It could even apply to members of the Jewish people as well. And this, I've been going through the piece. It's a really long piece, but there's a lot of great sound bites and awesome quotes that I want to share with you. And rather than squeeze into this session, we might dedicate next session just to that. So we're going to end here on page Tzadi Daled. You could hold on to this PDF because we will use it next week as well, Mirza Hashem. So I'll conclude right over here. This is the end of part number 1, Ad Kan, Hakafa Aleph. And I'll stay on for another few minutes to address questions, starting with Phyllis, who's waiting patiently. And please get in order. And anyone else want to have a question, they want to get in the queue. Okay, Phyllis, you're up.
Do any of the commentators discuss the positive versus the negative part of the commandment, the Zachor lo tishkach?
Yes. So the mitzvah of okay, I don't remember all the different shatim offhand, but one of them, of course, is that we have to go here parsha Zachor, which is very likely a mitzvah deoraisa to make a mitzvah of Zachor. So that's important.
But what about the lo? In other words, that's the only Zachor is to hear.
This is probably something I should know offhand, but I'm blanking out on. So you'll forgive me, but I'll try to make a note to look that up next time. Okay, that's a good point. There's 2 mitzvahs there. I have to look it up in a Sefer HaChinuch. Jake.
Well, one's positive and one's negative.
Yeah, you are correct. I need to look it up in a Sefer HaChinuch. But that's a great observation, Phyllis, and that does require analysis. Jake.
You mentioned before about the philosophy also as the second point. I mean, does these all apply? Hopefully I get it correct in terms of those that want to, destroy us, not necessarily physically, but the rise of anti-Semitism. Does that also impact what you're saying? Right.
So I guess you could say there are 2 different models for anti-Semitism, which Rabbi Chaim Wasserman in that piece we're just talking about, he's not the first one to do it, but he contrasts Purim and Hanukkah. In Purim, the anti-Semites wanted to destroy our bodies, and in Hanukkah, they wanted to destroy our souls religiously. So Rosh Soloveitchik's model of Reb Chaim is talking about anti-Semites who want to kill us. That's more like the Purim story. Whereas Rav Moshe Sternbach's conceptualization of Reb Chaim is he's discussing those who want to ideologically destroy Judaism, and that's more of the Hanukkah model. So those who are violent against us fit more into the first model. And you could be both, by the way. You could want to kill Jews, and killing Jews is a pretty good way of making sure that our beliefs don't live on. If you eliminate every last Jew, then no one's practicing Judaism. So it could go together. It's not either or. All right. Any other questions? Perfect. And we ended in 40 minutes. So we kept it nice and good timing. So part 2, God willing, next week. And I guess you guys can let me know if you want to meet in person or not. This was actually pretty convenient, but if people want to meet in person, I certainly value Talmud Torah in person, and you let me know if there's a desire to meet in person next week. Have a good night.
Good night, Rabbi. Thank you.